Welcome to Genuine University's webinar on being yourself. Now, this is a particularly interesting topic. I'm going to say something fairly controversial at the outset, and that is that the advice, just be yourself, is so useless that it's almost insulting. Now, that might sound like I'm having a go at people and so on. However, what I'm really saying is that it's a bit like telling somebody, if you want to go from point A to point B, well, why don't you just be there? Why don't you just teleport? Why don't you just be here and then a moment later be there? Now, I'm not saying that doing that is impossible. I mean, technology might advance to the extent where we can actually, beam in and beam out like Star Trek and so on. I mean, that might sound a little bit ridiculous, but the fact is that one of the devices that I've got helping me do webinars is basically a tablet, which is something that actually came from Star Trek. So I'm not saying that just be yourself will never be useful advice. I'm saying at this point in time, the idea that you can just go from being stuck in something to being unstuck because somebody who seems to think that they know better than you says just be yourself, the idea that you can do that, well, it's almost insulting. And I just want to, this webinar is going to help free you of a lot of preconceptions and judgments that you have against yourself for not already having arrived, so to speak. Like I'm 44 years old, and I thought that I'd have everything pretty much sorted out by the time I was 30. And, when I was 20, I thought I'd have it sorted out by the time I was 25 and so on. And by the time I got to 40, I realized, what, I'm not ever going to really have it sorted out. And really accepted something that I'd been saying for a long time to myself and to others, and that is that life is a journey. And I've come up with a saying on that, which is, life is a journey, and when you fall in love with the journey, you'll be in love forever. So the idea that you can just instantaneously be yourself denies the experience and the beauty of that journey. And it's important to allow yourself to have that journey. And we'll talk about a lot of the ways that you can actually be more authentically yourself. And I won't be giving you any specific instructions on how to do that. A lot of the information that I provide, I like to be as specific as I can. But you, as in who you are, is a nebulous thing. And by nebulous, I mean like a nebula. And a nebula is like something that is almost as big as the galaxy. So the whole idea of who you are is so broad that to go into specifics is once again almost insulting. If I was to tell you, the idea to be yourself is to have this particular breakfast cereal, I mean, it's a joke. So we'll move right along. Normally I talk a little bit about Genuine University and myself, but this is the 6th of 38 webinars, and to be honest, I'm getting a little tired of talking about myself. So if you want to learn about me and who I am, my name is Peter Hagerty. You can go back to the other webinars that are available online. And I will talk a bit about Genuine University towards the end of this webinar. Normally I say it at the beginning, but I'm putting it at the end because I want to elaborate on how Genuine University can help you be yourself. A lot of people that know me and know my work have suggested that my work on purpose is really my signature work. But I think that Genuine University, and if you look at the screen, you can see how it's spelled. It's university starting with a Y-O-U, because it's about you. So the whole being yourself concept is pretty much more authentically what Genuine University is about. So I'm going to talk to you about it at the end. So if you think of being yourself, just completely letting loose, then you might have the idea that there'll be all sorts of disastrous possibilities that could occur. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, when I was about 14, I was a lot more outspoken than I am these days. A lot of people tell me that I am too outspoken anyway, but anyway, I remember when I was about 14, I was sitting in class waiting for the teacher to come in, and this teacher came in, and I've got to tell you, I think teachers are wonderful. all in all, I have great respect for teachers, especially given the work that they do and how dedicated you need to be to do that, and how to handle that many kids and so on. You know, there are so many teachers, and I can think of quite a few right now that are just prime examples of wonderful human beings. And they're in their right job. They're in, you know, a great vocation for them. The teacher that I'm going to talk about was not in the right vocation. So I hope you don't think that I'm disrespectful to teachers all the time, or people in general. But basically this teacher comes in and he was very frustrated, which was pretty normal for this guy. And he starts basically yelling at everybody and says, you know, why is it everywhere I go here, there's idiots. I go there, there's idiots. When I go to the shopping centre and there's idiots. Everywhere I go, there's idiots. Why? Why? And he's yelling, going on this tirade, and everybody's completely quiet, and he's just staring at the class. And somebody said, because wherever you go, you go. And, you know, everybody burst out laughing, and I thought, well, that's pretty funny, but I don't think it's very appropriate to have said that. And I'm looking around to see who's said it. And I noticed that everybody's looking at me. And I realized that I had been one that had said it. So, you know, that's an example of where being yourself is not really helpful. And as a 14-year-old kid, getting a week of detention is really not much fun. So, but unfortunately, you know what, later on, being myself actually got me out of that situation, because I ended up having detention being administered by a different teacher, a teacher that I knew quite well, and who was an example of the kind of person who really excels and is a gift to the students that he teaches. And anyway, he asked me, you know, how did you get a week's detention? You know, this is something that we don't really do in this school. And I told him what happened, and he laughed, could not stop laughing. And then he told me to clean the blackboard, because back then we had blackboards, not whiteboards. Told me to clean the blackboard and said, okay, that's enough. That's a full week's detention as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, so being myself by telling him about it actually got me out of it, I guess. Okay, so here's another example of being yourself in an unbridled fashion. In May 2013, on a flight from LA to New York, a woman would not stop singing "I Will Always Love You." You can look this up if you want, it's pretty interesting. After numerous complaints from passengers, the flight made an unscheduled stop in Kansas to remove the woman from the aircraft. Now, when I was looking into this, you know, when I find out these weird things, I like to look into them and just find out, you know, test the veracity to some extent to see whether it's actually the real deal. Apparently, she kept singing it as she was escorted from the flight through the gate, through the terminal, into a holding cell. The person in charge at Kansas Airport basically said all he did was shook his head and just, you know, released her, said, you know, you're not allowed to travel on a plane for the next, I don't know how long, but we're not charging you with anything. So, you know, that's an example of somebody being themselves with a possibility that's not really that helpful for her. But hey, you know, I guess she had her reasons. And the thing is this, I was talking to somebody today, actually, you know, as many of you know, I'm a coach. And I think that any good coach has a coach themselves. And I was talking to my coach earlier today, and we were talking about how, you know, one of the things about being yourself is like committing to what you want to do and accepting the consequences. So I guess that woman was pretty fine with accepting those consequences. Personally, I wouldn't like to be stopped in the middle of the country and, you know, have to find another alternate route. So I might decide to suppress myself a little bit in that situation. If I was committed to singing "I Will Always Love You," I might mumble or something instead. Okay, so just going on with another example on this front about being yourself and how it doesn't always work out for you. Ultimately, the advice to be yourself assumes a whole lot of self-awareness and integration that you may not have. And I mean, if somebody says to you, oh, just be yourself, it almost presupposes either that they know who you should be, which, and if you do what they say, then you're not actually being yourself, or it presupposes that you know yourself. And, you know, the inscription above the archway leading into the oracle at Delphi actually said, know thyself. And it's the most supreme and concise, succinct wisdom that there is, in my opinion. And the great philosophers tend to agree. And that doesn't necessarily make it right, but there's a lot of evidence pointing towards that being a good idea. Now, if all these philosophers and great thinkers think that this advice is so valuable, know thyself, what do you think they might think of the idea of, you know, the offhand advice, somebody giving you offhand advice of be yourself? They'd probably frown upon that, I'm guessing. So the idea, once again, that you can just go from not necessarily knowing who you are or being aware of yourself and suddenly know who you are is a little bit insulting, because ultimately sometimes things are not within your control. I mean, take the case of this 13-year-old boy in 2008 who was arrested for farting in school, for excessive farting in school. Now you can look into this. There's a little bit more to this story. He may have had some self-control, but some self-control issues. But ultimately, there are certain things that are going to happen that are not within your control. So simply being yourself is, you know, while it's well-meaning advice, it's kind of useless. It reminds me of some advice that I got from my daughter many years ago. When she was about 2 years old, she wanted to be involved in going to the shop and doing the shopping. She wanted to be helpful. You know, that's that, you know, wonderful thing that a lot of kids have, that desire to be helpful and to join in. So I said to her, I got out a pen and paper and I started saying, okay, we're going to write a list. You know, what do we need? I'm going to the shop, what do we need? And she goes, a shop. And I said, okay, right, thanks. So I wrote down shop and I said, okay, what do we need? When we go to the shop, what do we need? Thinking, you know, she's going to come up with a grocery item or something. And she goes, a car? I said, okay. I wrote down a car. I said, okay, great. We've got the shop, we've got the car. Great. So what do we actually need when we go to the shop? And she says, money. And I went, okay, thanks. So can you help me with what we actually need? And she turns around and says, I've helped you enough. So that's an example of people giving advice that is actually incredibly accurate and perhaps well-meaning, but ultimately it's quite useless. I mean, because you assume that that you have a car, a shop, and money if you want to go shopping, right? So, but then again, the advice of simply be yourself is equally as useless as something like that. I mean, I hope the example with my daughter is a little bit more amusing, though. Personally, I find the idea of being yourself, just handing that off to somebody, is really quite useless, and that's why I say that it's bordering on insulting. So simply being yourself is not simple at all. Now, I say that from a perspective of, if you don't know how to be yourself, then it's the most complicated thing in the world. If you're in a space of really being in touch and knowing yourself, then it's actually quite simple. So the advice that I'm giving, the indication that I'm giving here is accurate if you are not already completely in touch with yourself, but inaccurate if you are really in touch with yourself. In fact, it's bloody easy. When you're being yourself, it's incredibly easy. David Data, who wrote Way of the Superior Man, is quite, I don't know if I'd quote him saying this, but I heard him say this in an interview. He said, either you are enlightened or you're in your stuff. Now, he used a bit more colourful language to describe stuff, but the idea is that you will move through areas of your life where you don't have things under control, where you are not good at something, where you can't handle things, where things aren't working out for you, where it's challenging, where it's painful, where all these horrible things are going on. And then as you integrate them and become more masterful in regards to these challenges, suddenly it's almost like the clouds part, the sun shines through, and everything is glorious. And and then you feel enlightened, and then you decide, you know what, I want to expand my life, and then you go and deal with some more stuff, and you get more spiritually harmonizing, integrating truth. So then when you deal with all of that stuff, you get more enlightened, and then you go into your stuff again. And so it's this process of being able to deal with more, and then because you can deal with more, then you tend to want to expand and take on more. So the idea of being yourself, just being yourself, just like that, you know, click your fingers and just be yourself, is a little bit silly, because, as I said earlier, it denies the perpetual journey toward real selfhood. So simply being yourself is not simple at all. For a start, who are you? Now we'll do or I'll give you an exercise to do after this webinar. I don't want to do it during the webinar because I know that a lot of people like to listen to these when they're in the car, and the particular exercise requires that you're not driving. So I'll supply something later which helps you identify the principle here that I'm talking about. You know, if you identify yourself with your car, let's say you have a particular car and you enjoy it and you love driving it and so on, and it almost forms part of your identity, then if somebody says, be yourself, just be yourself, then what are they saying? They're saying be a car, right? Now, obviously, I'm being a little bit facetious here, tongue-in-cheek, but you cannot really be yourself whilst you are over-identified with particular things, or a relationship, or a role like your job, or, you know, I'm a parent and that's all you are. I mean, it's sometimes wonderful and also a bit saddening to see parents who just identify themselves with only being a parent. It's wonderful in the way of, wow, you know, what an experience that child must have. But it's also a little bit, sometimes can be a little bit disheartening, especially if you can perceive that this person has a lot more in them than being a parent. And I don't say just being a parent, because parenthood is sacred in my opinion, but there is often more of an aspect. But then again, I mean, there's somebody that I know a lady who has 4 kids, and says, you know what, I wish I'd started having kids earlier, because I wish, you know, if I'd started earlier, I could have had 15 kids. And like her thing is like, you can see that the core of her being is about being a mother, and pretty much everything for her. And I wouldn't wish her being much else. I wouldn't wish her to be much else. But then there are other people who are kind of locked into the role of being a parent, and you can really tell that they want there to be other aspects. Not that it's not enough, it's just that there's more facets to their being that are not being expressed. And the idea that you're ever going to fully know yourself is a little bit ridiculous, because, as I've said a few times already, it is a perpetual journey. So simply being yourself is not simple, because, I mean, who are you? If you are present, completely present, you have a good chance of knowing who you are in that moment. But it may just be a momentary thing. The idea that you can simply be yourself every moment of every single day without being distracted and so on is, once again, it's delusional. How do you know which part of you is you and which parts are not? I mean, I'm wearing a particular shirt at the moment. You can't see me, but this particular shirt, I really love this shirt. In fact, when I bought it, I turned around and I went to the bathroom and put the shirt on because I wanted to wear it. Then I went, you know what? I'm going to go and buy another one of those. So I bought another one exactly the same, because I thought, you know, I'll never find this shirt again. Is that me? Am I my shirt? Am I the car that I'm driving? I particularly like my phone. Am I my phone? No, there's a TV series called Life, which I saw, and the main character in it is a guy who was a policeman and was wrongfully accused of a crime, went to prison, was shown to be innocent later on, and then got a massive payout from the government. And so he's extremely wealthy, and finds himself, he's very much into Zen and so on, and he finds himself driving around this wonderful car that he just really adores. And he's driving along and says to himself, I really love this car. And then later on as he's driving along, he says, I am not my car. I'm not my car. And he pulls up at traffic lights and there's these girls sitting in the car next to him and they wind down the window and they say, hey, nice car. And he just turns to them and says, want it? And then the next scene is him driving off in this jalopy and then driving off in this car because he's just given them the car. The things that you are attached to effectively own you. And if you cannot let go of a thing, then in many respects, you are that thing and you are limited by it. And this is where, you know, the Buddhists kind of say that all desire, the root of suffering is desire, and all desire leads to suffering and so on. They say it in many different ways. And in the West, I think that we've misinterpreted what they mean by that. I want to put forth the idea that what they really mean is that attachment is the root of suffering. And it's a good idea to let go of things on a regular basis. And the exercise that I'll send out after this webinar, I used to call it seeing into people, because it's effectively a way of letting go of attachments, and it creates the ability to connect with others. And through doing so, because effectively, and there's another principle called, which is the seer, the seeing and the seen are the same. So the person who is seeing and the act of seeing and the thing that is seen are actually the same. And it's just a nice way of saying that everything around you is a reflection of you. And this is a metaphysical principle, which I don't know that we can prove it in a scientific sense. But let's just entertain the idea. I'm not telling you what to think or necessarily even believe this, but if we entertain the idea that everything around you is a reflection of you, then if you let go of your attachment to seeing things in a certain way, then you're actually letting go of your attachment to being a certain way yourself. And then that allows you to be more flowing and more generously and naturally expressive of who you actually are. So that exercise, I said I used to call it seeing into people, because the context of it is that you actually just look at people and let go of your preconceptions about that person one by one. And now I call it the instant connection multiplier, because for marketing purposes, it's a much nicer name, you know, because it actually creates connections with others. You let go of your preconceptions about people and you automatically begin to feel an acceptance of them. And by doing so, people actually feel that openness. And I mean, I've done this particular exercise to a degree which some would say is a little bit crazy. You know, taking off 2 weeks and devoting myself to doing it 10 to 12 hours per day. And I found that once I had done that, I couldn't walk 10 meters down the street without somebody introducing themselves to me, and they didn't quite know why. It has quite a bizarre effect. Anyway, I'm sort of digressing a little bit. I'm talking about the reasons why we can't just simply be ourselves, because we have attachments to being a certain way, to things, to behavior patterns, to identifying ourselves with, you know, I'm this or I'm that or I'm, you know, something else. But if you can let go of those things, and I don't mean abandon them or throw them away or disdain them, I just mean release the attachment and let it flow, then you have far more chance of actually being yourself. Okay, simply being yourself is not simple at all, and this is interesting. 99% of your DNA is identical to everyone else. So the idea of you being an individual is a little bit challenged by that. I just put that in as a point of interest. And you have about 500 species of microbes living in your gut. Those are the ones that are identified. I have a feeling that if we went further and tried to identify more and more, that we'd come up with a lot more than that. I bet you any money that it's those 500 species of microbes are the main microbes. There are actually thousands upon thousands of them. Another interesting point on a biological standpoint, more than 90% of the cells in your body are not even human. Does that feel a little bit creepy? I'm putting up some pictures of what these things look like. So I've got some sort of I don't know, it looks like a microphone type thing with tail and spikes on it. And then we've got some other alien looking thing, and then we have like a, I don't know, like a hairy biscuit or something like this is at a microscopic level. Now, I'm kind of misleading you a little bit. I'm not actually saying that 90% of the mass, your body mass, is not human. I'm saying the number of cells in your body, because in actual fact, those cells that aren't even human are much, much smaller than human cells, and they only end up weighing about 3 to 4 kilos in total. Because our actual human cells, by number, while they're only 10%, by size, they actually make up a whole lot more. So you're also challenged in being yourself, because, I mean, we're exposed to 3,500 messages per day that try to influence us in some way. They're almost telling us who we should be. We live out in the country, and we tend not to be exposed to quite so many messages, although being on the internet a lot, I guess I'm still getting up there. It's probably a few thousand anyway. So these messages are all influencing us in some way. So it's actually quite a challenge. And I mean, we tend to want to fit in at times. And then by fitting in, I mean, does that mean we're actually being ourselves, or that we're not being ourselves? When you try to create a subculture, there's a paradox called the culture paradox, which says that when you become part of a subculture, and by subculture I mean a specific type of expression in a culture. So you might have a subculture of people who like a particular type of music, or a subculture of people who dress in a certain way, you know, like the emos and so on. I mean, they stand out because that's their subculture. You might also have secret subcultures. I mean, there are secret games that people play on their portable mobile phones or cell phones, where if you come in range of somebody else who has the same game operating on their phone, then there's a little interaction that happens there. I mean, that's a subculture. And the paradox of the subcultures is that by banding together with people who are like you, it ironically creates an opportunity for you to be more individual. Because by banding together with people who are like you, within that small circle, within that little microcosm, the differences between those people who appear to be similar to one another on the outside, the differences of how they actually are, becomes more evident because they're accentuated. So here's something that is quite ironic. You can become more yourself by hanging out with people who are like you. And I'll repeat that. You can become more yourself by hanging out with people who are like you, and the reason why is because then accentuates your differences. And I'll go into that a little bit later, because ultimately I did not call this webinar Be Yourself. I called it Being Yourself because being is a verb. It's something that is active. Because just being yourself, so just sitting there in being without actually doing, it almost defies who you really are, because ultimately there's a tendency to want to express. Okay. So simply being yourself is not simple at all. We've been trained from birth to be like our parents. And ultimately, what ends up happening is that you have the grandchildren being like the grandparents, because, you know, you might have parents that are very strict, and then their children grow up with the idea that being strict is bad because they see all the bad things about being strict. And so the children end up being quite lenient. And then when they have kids, they'll be lenient with their kids, and then those kids will go back to the original parents we're talking about, who are now grandparents, and because their parents are lenient, they tend to want order and structure, and then so they'll resonate with the grandparents. And so there's behavioral patterns that skip a generation. So basically our parents sort of, ironically, they start trying to inject us with certain values and so on, and often it ends up being the opposite of what they want. And we end up being like the bad things that our grandparents implanted into our parents. So anyway, there are all these things, all these things trying to make us be a certain way. We've also been trained to control our body. This is really unfortunate in that most of us these days, especially in the Western world, are not in touch with our body. And in order to be yourself, your principal vehicle of expression is something that is going to give you a lot of clues about how to be yourself. So in order to be yourself, being in touch with your body is extremely helpful. And we'll go into this a little bit later. I've got the different levels of being. I've got a very, very basic diagram to show you on this. It's incredibly simple, the description that I've got about the different levels of being, and body level is one of them. But I just want to say right now, before we get to that it's important to actually take in what I say when we get to the different levels of being, because it will help you sort out all sorts of things. Okay, pardon me. So we've been trained from birth to behave in a particular way. Don't pick your nose in public and all that sort of thing, and don't spit in the bank, and to do all sorts of things. And perhaps we actually, don't fart continually in class, don't continually sing on the aeroplane, all these different things. And these things actually stop us being ourselves. And we've also been trained to be a good example of our culture. To be a good Australian, to be a good American, to be a good Brit. I was working with an English client of mine not that long ago, and I actually turned around and I said, look, I don't want to be insulting to you, but I need to say that it's important for you to claim what you want, to state what it is that you want. And I don't want to be insulting to your culture, but I find a lot of English people have trouble with this because they see it as being impolite. So, I don't want to be seen as, being an upstart or something like that. I'm making fun a little bit. In the country that I come from, Australia, we tend to make fun of British people. It's because they imprisoned a whole lot of people in this country, and that's how we got started. So you can see this. I'm a good example of my culture. Anyway, I love English people. I've got many friends who are English. There's another client that I worked with who, also English, who worked very hard to get to the point where he could buy a particular car. And he was so embarrassed about having this car that he would get up at 4 in the morning and drive the car around and then put it in the garage so that nobody in the town that he was living in would know that he had this car, because that would be embarrassing. So anyway, I'll stop Brit bashing and we'll just move on. I think I shouldn't be carrying on with in jokes when I'm in a webinar. It's a little bit rude. Anyway, so being yourself, we're exposed to all these different messages. We've got all these different things, and often they're not helpful. I saw this ad online today for a Better Start in Life Start Cola earlier. And apparently the Soda Pop Board of America says that laboratory tests over the last few years have proven that babies who start drinking soda during that early formative period have a much higher chance of gaining and fitting in during those awkward preteen and teen years. So do yourself a favour and do your child a favour. Start them on a strict regimen of sodas and other sugary carbonated beverages right now for a lifetime of guaranteed happiness. Yeah. I mean, that message is probably from the 1950s, right? So we can laugh at it now. But, what messages are we getting today that are quite frankly ridiculous? That are stopping you doing what is natural for you. I love going out in the sun and enjoying sunshine. Yet there's all these different things, especially in Australia. We have the highest incidence of skin cancer in the world. But, I follow a different regimen, and, I've had a little bit of an issue with skin cancer, and I followed a method of dealing with skin cancer that was completely against what the medical fraternity says. And it took me about 15 days to suddenly not have an issue with skin cancer anymore. So, I personally think that that particular message that society is giving us is incorrect. But how do I know? I mean, we used to get told that if you had asthma, that going and swimming in indoor pools that are highly chlorinated is very good for asthma. And now we know, that's not right at all. That doesn't help. And unfortunately, I'm an example of that. I had a little bit of asthma when I was a teenager, and that's not what helped at all. I did other things. You know what? That's when I started to learn to question the medical authorities and so on. Now, being yourself is also not that simple, and sometimes being yourself can be deadly. Got a picture there or a cartoon of a woman being burned at the stake. And there's a lot of evidence of people being burned at the stake for things which we now see as being quite ridiculous, for speaking out in such a way or for doing what's right for you and so on. So sometimes being yourself is not easy. Like people say, just be yourself, and it can get you thrown off a plane, it can get you arrested for farting in school, it can get you burned at the stake, for God's sake. I know that with political correctness and so on, which Mao Zedong came up with, the idea that you're not allowed to say this, you have to kind of say certain things that are respectful in a certain way. It became very unpopular to say anything that somebody else might not like, because then you would quite literally be the subject of a witch hunt. And thankfully, that political correctness is kind of seeing the end of itself. But there are still certain things that you're not allowed to say things, even if it's true. You're not allowed to say it. Now, just bring up a picture of Mahatma Gandhi. And something that he wrote. He says, I offer you peace. I offer you love. I offer you friendship. I see your beauty. I hear your need. I feel your feelings. My wisdom flows from the highest source. I salute that source in you. Let us work together for unity and peace. Now, I'm not sure if you know, but Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated. So somebody who's being himself, who puts across a message like that, which in many respects, I personally find that hard to fault that message. But if I look at, the Sikh religion, and I put that in terms of how they see things, then it's pretty clear why a Sikh assassinated Gandhi. And I'm not trying to say that all Sikhs are assassins or anything like that. I just see that because what they're about is going for what is uniquely right for you, then they're not really about necessarily unity and so on. They're more about individualism. And so you can see that a message like that, which is about joining together for people who want to be individuals, is not very nice. So being yourself can actually be quite deadly. Now, most of us are not even aware of our own values. I've talked a lot about values in previous webinars, and I'm going to go into them even more as we progress through these webinars. We don't know what our values are because our values are generated from what's missing, and when our values are generated from what's missing, it's an emptiness that tends to generate those values, and because an emptiness is generating what's important to us, we tend not to know what those values are. So it's hard to be conscious of what your real values are. Generally, when I work with people on values determination, if I say to them straight up, write down your top 5 values, they might write down a few different things, and then when we actually look at what their life demonstrates, so in other words, what they are actually doing, their values turn out to be quite different. If you want to know what your values are, then it's important to actually examine what you do on a day-to-day basis. Like I used to say to myself that looking after my health was a top value for me. However, I would go through very long periods of working extremely hard with very little sleep and not eating very well. So if I think that my health is my top value and I'm actually treating myself really badly, as far as health goes by working, then obviously my value is actually on my work, because that's what I'm demonstrating. And we all have these delusions. We think this certain thing is important, but we don't actually act upon that. And really what it comes down to it is what you do that determines what your values are. And most of us are, got to be straight with you, most of us are quite deluded about what we actually do on a day-to-day basis. If we filmed ourselves, we'd be quite surprised at what we're actually doing. I went through a process where I had a revolving alarm, so effectively every 5 minutes an alarm would go off on my watch, and I'd just quickly jot down what I was doing, and then I tallied up everything, and I spent enormous amounts of time sitting staring at my computer screen thinking about what I wanted to write. So instead I started going and doing other things and letting my writing process develop on its own. And so basically it was clear that my highest value was on writing things really well, whereas I actually thought my highest value was on keeping the house clean and all this sort of stuff at the time. But looking at the house when I was in the process of writing this particular book, it was pretty clear my value wasn't on keeping the house clean. My value was on writing. And so I just kind of went into a meditative state when I'd be cleaning the house, and then that would drop down and I'd let go of whatever I was doing if I was cleaning, if I got an idea, and I'd jot it down. Okay, most of us don't know what our own values are, and so we end up acting according to a set of implanted values that are frequently at odds with our own truth. Now, these implanted values are things that we are told that should be important to us. And they might, they might be in line with your truth. If they are, great. But if they're not, then it can create all sorts of issues. I've come across a lot of people trying to teach people how to deal with procrastination, how to beat procrastination. And I've got to say that 99% of what I've come across, and I've looked into a lot of this, 99% of what I've come across is really not helpful, because it basically says that you say you want to do your taxes, let's say, and you're not doing them, therefore you're procrastinating, and your taxes are important, so therefore we'll find ways of manipulating and forcing you into doing your taxes. And usually there's a whole lot of punishment set up and so on. What is far more valuable to do is to look at what the procrastination is helping you to do. So if it's your taxes, then procrastinating is perhaps helping you go and have a good time with your friends. However, because there are sometimes things that need to be done, maybe you work on your taxes for half an hour a day and then go and have a great time with your friends. Suddenly the procrastination is not an issue because you've linked it to this, that, and the other. Perhaps you realize that there's a good chance you're going to get a tax return. Let's say you're getting a $3,000 tax return. What do you do with that $3,000? Spend it within your values. Go and have fun with your friends. Maybe you have an injected value or an implanted set of values that say that you should invest that $3,000. I personally find that it's good to have a ratio of what I'd call fun money. So if I have a certain amount of income, let's say I make $10,000, I have a very disciplined attitude towards that, in that I make sure that I spend at least $1,000 of that in a way that I really enjoy, and that means that I have nothing to show for it at the end. In other words, I don't have a gold watch or what I've got is a great experience with myself or someone else, or maybe I might even give it away if that feels like loads of fun, if it's really meaningful. So in other words, we don't know who we are if we are living with a set of implanted values and we don't challenge them. And I brought up that thing about procrastination because I want you to look at your procrastination in a different way. It's telling you what's important to you. And we'll go into more of that a little bit later. Actually, you know what? I've lied to you a little bit there. We're going to go into that now. Okay, how to be yourself. Now, this is where I'll be talking in fairly general terms. I don't want to give you a prescribed set of exercises and ideas and things that you should do and then if you do that, then according to the Peter Haggerty School of Selfhood, you've been yourself. It's ridiculous. But there are some very broad principles which are worth remembering. It's a beautiful saying from St. Francis de Sales. I'm sure that there's a better way of pronouncing that, perhaps in French. He says, have patience with all things, but first of all, with yourself. Now, the worst way to go about being yourself is to set up a reward and punishment system. In other words, if I achieve this and that, then I earn the right to be myself. If I make $5 million, if I marry the right woman or man, if my kid succeeds in school, if my kid becomes captain of the baseball team, I get to, etc., etc., etc. It's wise to simply say, you know what, I'm traveling a path, and that path is my own path, and I'm patient with that path. I have a saying which is, each in their own way, each in their own time. And when you're having trouble and you're not getting the results that you want, if you just repeat that to yourself, each in their own way, each in their own time, I personally find it tends to relax me. And I hope that it does for you too. And it's basically being patient with whatever the process is. I remember years ago I had a business, a fledgling business, and I got this amazing opportunity to promote it. I was basically being paid to offer the services of my business, and then the people buying it in bulk would then promote me far and wide as a result of it. Kind of a golden opportunity. And I procrastinated endlessly about taking up this opportunity, and in the end I pretty well ruined it. And I was very hard on myself for doing that. It's like I was being real idiot, basically, is the kind of language that I would use with myself. And then years later I realized that if I had taken up that opportunity, I would have been chained to a system that I really didn't like at all. And I would have burned myself out pretty quickly and become quite ill. And ultimately I was not ready for that opportunity, and I didn't want that opportunity. But according to all the parameters of what I told myself I wanted, because I had injected values or implanted values, I judged myself quite harshly. And then later on, when I decided, you know what, I'm going to try this patience thing. It took a long time because, when you're patient with patience, it can take quite a long time for you to get results. But there's another saying that goes in line with this, which is infinite patience yields instant results. So I found that the more patient I was, at first it was very painful to actually accept myself in this particular situation. But as I started to get traction with that, it all seemed to come all at once. And suddenly I was like, wow, actually I'm quite grateful to myself for effectively screwing up that opportunity, because it meant that I didn't really sell myself out. This takes us naturally into the next point, which is, and this is a quote from Nathaniel Brand, self-acceptance is my refusal to be in an adversarial relationship to myself. Refuse to beat yourself up. I mean, sometimes having shame about something because you've done something that is really against your values, or has really screwed somebody else over, or made life difficult for you and those you care about, shame can be very helpful in helping you to correct things. But I think it's way too overused. The amount of time that you might, here's a great example. I had a client once who was guilt-ridden because someone was running for the lift and asked for the door to be held, and she went to hold the door, but pushed the wrong button and closed the lift, right? And spent weeks agonizing over what could have happened for this person. And inevitably I came down to asking her, are you allowed to make mistakes? And she just looked at me like I was speaking another language. She couldn't comprehend what I was saying, because she had this rule in her head that she has to be kind to others always. And I mean, what she did, it wasn't really that kind, right? Her intention was quite different, but what she actually did was different from her intention, and thus she, got into an adversarial relationship with herself and started beating herself up. And how can I make amends and all this sort of thing, and started talking about karma a lot. And I mean, sometimes we will take the most inane things and make a big difference. I mean, let's say that, you were closing, trying to hold the door open for somebody trying to get into a ship that was departing a war-torn country, and if the person didn't get on, they'd die. Then maybe there's a reason to have some shame over not letting them on the ship. But in the situation that was described, I mean, it was just somebody rushing for the lift. I mean, we don't know. Maybe there was a big life consequence for them, but chances are that there wasn't. Now, there's another saying that I was trying to find because I found it so useful myself, and I could not find it anywhere. But basically, I don't know who said it, so if anybody knows, please feel free to contact me and I'll give credit. Basically, it goes something like this. When loving yourself, start with radical self-acceptance. And the whole point of it, when it says like radical self-acceptance, it's like, it means daring to accept yourself for what you might think is unacceptable. And so you think, well, I'm actually not that great. Well, hey, maybe I am not so bad. Maybe I deserve to be accepted for this, that, and the other. Because, I mean, ultimately, if you want to be yourself, how likely do you think you are to succeed at that, in whatever degree, if you don't accept yourself? You're lost already. And we'll go into that a little bit later as well. Okay, so the next stage is a quote which is apparently from the Buddha or Siddhartha. He says, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." And the Buddhists have this wonderful meditation called Metta Bhavana, which basically talks about offering kindness to self and kindness to others. And that's all you do. You just keep on doing that. You just keep on doing that, keep on doing that. And the exercise that I talked about, the seeing into people exercise, is based around that. It's a little bit different, a little bit more modern, but the principle is the same, because the ancient principles that stand the test of time are often the best things to follow when it comes to this sort of work in actually being yourself. So offer yourself love, offer yourself kindness. You don't need to beat yourself up in order to deserve it. You will never be able to be yourself under a whip which you hold. It's just not going to happen. I mean, if we look at what some of the Christian sects which used to flagellate themselves, which used to whip themselves for their sins so that they could get closer to God, I haven't really seen any really sublime wisdom come out of there, except there's something wrong with you. And I personally don't subscribe to that. If that challenges you, then I challenge you to have a look at how kind you are being to yourself. So now we'll just move on. So basically we've got be patient with yourself, accept yourself, and offer yourself love. These are the first steps toward being yourself. And they're not specific, as I've said this a few times, and I just want to reiterate it. I'm not saying do it in a particular order and put a straitjacket on. And if you're procrastinating doing one of these steps, then look into what the procrastination is telling you is more important to you, and then be patient with that. Be patient with the procrastination. Accept the procrastination, and then find out what value it holds for you, and love yourself for that procrastination. And ultimately you'll probably end up being more successful with the thing that you're avoiding if you actually have patience, accept yourself, and love yourself. So we're going to what I call the law of lesser rejection. This is modeled on another principle that was taught to me by John Demartini. He talked about the law of lesser pisses and so on, but it doesn't really apply in this webinar, but I just want to let you know where this came from. This is something that I came up with. So we've got a picture of you there. So I've got a little stick figure. And if you want to offer something into the world and there's a chance that you might be accepted and there's a chance that you might be rejected, then if you offer that into the world, let's say it's 50-50. I mean, it might be a different ratio, but let's say it's 50-50. So you've got a good chance of being accepted if you offer something of yourself into the world. But if you then do not offer that because of the chance that you might be rejected, so you're focusing on the chance that you might be rejected instead of the chance that you might be accepted, if you then don't offer it, then effectively you've rejected yourself. So the law of lesser rejection says that you will experience less rejection by offering your genuine self into the world than you would if you don't, because if you don't offer your genuine self into the world, you've rejected yourself already. So you'll get 100% rejection there. In this diagram, you know, if it's 50-50, you get 50% rejection, 50% acceptance if you offer yourself into the world, your genuine self into the world. But if you don't offer your genuine self into the world, you get 100% rejection because you've rejected yourself before you even start. So basically, the law of lesser rejection says that offering your genuine self into the world yields less rejection than not. Now, of course, you don't want to just go for it willy-nilly necessarily, because we don't necessarily want to get burned at the stake or executed or assassinated for offering our genuine self. So it's important to be wise about it. Because let's face it, we share this world with others. They have their values too. They are different from us in many respects. 99% of their DNA is the same, but that 1% is such a glorious difference. And if you look at the Science of Boundless Wealth webinar from last week, you'll see that it's the differences that actually generate wealth. But we're not necessarily going into that today. There's another webinar on it which is free if you want to download it, and you know, I'd love you to do that. So the law of lesser rejection, once again, states that offering your genuine self into the world yields less rejection than not. Very simple. Now, often we think that it's better to reject ourselves than to be rejected by somebody else. And nothing could be further from the truth. It's almost like it feels intuitive that that's true, but it's actually not true at all. So I really need to mess with your head on that one, because that belief system just doesn't hold water. Have a good look at it, because a lot of the belief systems that don't serve us do not stand up to really thorough examination. Okay, so in order to be yourself, you also need discipline. Now this might sound a little bit like the opposite of what I've actually been talking about. But let's look at what discipline means. I mean, you might want to think now, what does discipline actually mean to you? What does it mean? If I say discipline, you need to be, hey, you need to be more disciplined. What do you project onto me as meaning? What am I telling you in your mind? What's the narrative? Am I telling you that you should punish yourself? You need to punish yourself and then you'll get somewhere. So if I say you need to be more disciplined, what program then gets triggered to start playing in your head about what I'm saying? Now, am I saying to you that, you know, you should commit to something and then stick to it? So you make a commitment that you're going to walk from point A to point B, you know, you stick to it because you've made the commitment. You said you're going to do it. I'm going to get it done, despite the fact that you know, there's an earthquake and a huge chasm opens between point A and point B, and you can't do it, so you just keep walking and fall into the chasm. You know, is that what it means? Is it that harsh? Is that what discipline means to you? Does it mean to you, and this is, I think, a higher order definition of discipline. Discipline means focusing on what is really important to you. So in other words, because I have a goal, something that's really important to me, in relation to having a fulfilling relationship. I know that if I eat this particular food, that I get all crabby and nasty, and that doesn't serve my relationship. So even though I enjoy the taste of that food, I know it's really bad for me and really bad for my relationship, and my relationship is more important than that taste, then you won't eat the food, right? However, if eating the food is more important to you than your relationship, maybe your partner's not very nice to you, then this discipline would then dictate that you will eat the food, because it's about what's important to you. And this is why I say it's a higher order of discipline. You might sacrifice on lesser levels to gain on higher levels. So you might sacrifice immediate spending in order to save up for something that's really important to you. And this is what I'm offering you as an alternative meaning of discipline. Now, there's a nice esoteric meaning, which is that in discipline, you are the disciple of that which is within. So in other words, you almost worship something that is within you. So it's that namaste quote. You know, when you say namaste to somebody, it's you're worshiping, I honor the divinity within you. Whereas I'm saying discipline means honoring the divinity inside your own self. And so that's what I want to offer you as an esoteric definition of what discipline means. And that would then lead you to focus on something that is more important and, you know, enable you to simply let go of the lesser things. Like as an example for me, if I'm in a committed relationship, you know, if other people tend to want to get into my space in that sort of intimate manner, I almost don't even see it. It's like I'm blind. I have to be told that if it's even going on. And what ends up happening there is that I'm a disciple to something that is more important. The intimacy that I'm getting, the rewards that I'm getting within the committed relationship are more important than what else might be available there. So we talked about relationships, savings, and so on with discipline. I want to ask you right now just to think of an area in your life where you are naturally disciplined, where other people go off track and go all over the place, whereas you actually are able to automatically make decisions which are right for you. They might not be right according to others, but they're right for you. So I hope that you've been able to acknowledge yourself for making decisions that are right for you. Doing that is also a really nice step on the path to being yourself. You say to yourself, you know what, I made this decision here and that was right for me. Sometimes people ask me, oh, you know, what degrees do you have? What qualifications do you have? And I talk about how I was enrolled to do biology at university on the day of I wasn't enrolled. On the day of enrollment, I was accepted, but on the day of enrollment, I just decided I'm not going to university. I'm going to go and learn how to run businesses, and there's other things that I want to learn that I don't think I can learn in a university. I also was incredibly bored at school just because they weren't teaching what I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn everything that I possibly could. So for me, the decision not to go to university was a disciplined decision. For other people who haven't gone to university, whose family think that going to university is the absolute pinnacle of everything, and if they've believed that, they might think that not going to university is a lack of discipline. Whereas if it's not true for them, then not going is discipline. Whereas if, let's say you want to be a biologist or a biochemist, then going to discipline is really important. So going to university is really important, and actually going and doing it is your choice in discipline. So I'm laboring this point a little bit because I want to get across that being disciplined is about being true to your higher self or your inner self, or this amorphous, nebulous thing which we call the self. There's a great book which is very challenging to read, and the author's name is impossible to pronounce, and I must admit I don't even remember it right now, but it's called I Am That, and it talks about just simply the self and how the self is, I am that in this moment. That is myself. Okay, so we'll talk about the different levels of being. So this is just a very quick one. We will go into this more in depth in later webinars and then in the enrolled programs at Genuine University as well. When people are coming to me and asking me to help them make decisions on things, and by help them make decisions, I don't mean make decisions for them. I mean help them kind of go through the process that they needed to reach a decision that is right for them. They would often say things like, "Oh, my intuition tells me that I should just go for it," or they'd say, "I've always got to trust my gut, follow your instincts." They'd say all these sorts of things, and people say follow your instincts when what they actually mean is use your head, or they might even mean follow your intuition, or they might say use your intellect, figure it out, and then go for what your instincts tell you. And there's a lot of confusion about decision-making modes. So I just want to go through 4 different levels of decision-making, so to speak. And these are also levels of being, because, we are, in some respects, animals. In other respects, we're loving beings. In other respects, we are logic machines. In other respects, we're like this sort of divine conglomeration of all 3 and able to express ourselves in truly miraculous ways. So the first level that I want to talk about is instinct. And I've got a little line there pointing roughly to where this guy's, I guess that's pointing to his spleen, but pointing to the area of the guts, so to speak. So when they say trust your guts, they're talking about instinct. They're talking about our animal self. And they found that in our liver, we actually have something very similar to brain type neurons. And so there's an animal intelligence. And like sometimes when you hear somebody saying something and it sounds really, really true and like logically it all makes sense, but they're lying. This is usually your instinct saying, liar, liar! And it tends to be not very gifted with words, your instinct, but it tends to just know stuff. Instinct is also where you have the kind of base level sexual attraction or not attraction, attraction or repulsion and so on. It's very basic, like the basic instinct, that term, basic instinct, because it is fundamental. It keeps you grounded. So if you're making decisions based on your instinct, then you're doing things like wondering, does this smell good and things like that, because smell is a sense that is very, very primal. One of the first senses to develop in us, and it's like an instantaneous reaction as well. If you're connecting with your intuition, then it's more in your heart. A lot of people think it's in the head, but it's more about what tends to open your mind, and so they might have a bit of a head experience there. But if you feel that you are connecting with your intuition, then it tends to be about things that make you want to feel generous and make you feel like being open and expansive and so on. If your intuition is telling you to kill somebody, it's probably not intuition, it's probably instinct. Maybe somebody's done some horrific criminal thing and you feel like you want to, do them great bodily harm, then it's not your intuition, it's probably your instinct. Now, if we just obeyed our instinct, then we're living like an animal. And in some respects, that's good, and in other respects, it's not so good. You don't necessarily want to live like an animal if you're at a medical conference, let's say. But if you're doing this obstacle course called Tough Mudder or something like that, or, doing something where you really got to, like if you're hunting or something like that, you might want to be more instinctual. The next level is our intellect, which is very much our head. And if we get these 3 operating really nicely, And I won't go into intellect too much because I think we're a very intellectual society. So I'm just going to assume that you've got that. Intellect is more the logical stuff, and intuition is more about what's expansive, and instinct is about survival and very basic perceptions about things. If you get all these three things in line, then you get the fourth level coming in, but I'll talk about that in just a moment. If something really feels right on an animal level and it makes you feel generous and like you are, it just feels like it's going to expand your being, and that's the intuition level, and it makes sense to do it. Intellectually, it makes sense to do it. Then you're probably dealing with inspiration. Because once you get all the three I's, intellect, intuition, and instinct in line, then inspiration tends to come in. And I've pointed that as being above the head. Because whether or not you believe in a divine channel of energy coming through the top of your head is not really relevant to what I'm talking about. I'm putting it above the head as just a way of saying that it's something bigger than you. It's like when you get the bottom three aligned, that you connect to something bigger, regardless of what that might be, whether it's spiritual or religious or society or your family. I'm not trying to tell you how that should be. So with your levels of being, you will be focused on one of the bottom three a lot of the time. And so, you might choose to be yourself in an instinctual way. If you're in a loving relationship, you might be more intuitive and heart-based with the way that you express that. And every now and then you kind of get it really animalistic with each other. And there's nothing wrong with that. Or you might, let's say you're going to be apart from your partner for a while, you might intellectually go, you know what, let's plan out a really nice date before that period of separation. So, you're engaging all the different levels in different respects. And then you can have quite an inspirational experience. So you can be on different levels. And, sometimes you'll be in a business meeting or something and your instincts just tell you something, this is not right or that's right or, you know what, it doesn't make sense, but I've just got to go for that. And so in being yourself, you're being instinctual. And I'm just presenting these different levels because what might be right on one level may be wrong on another level. And ideally, it behooves you, if you want to really be yourself, to try to undertake actions which make sense on all those three levels on the bottom there, and then it activates inspiration. And that is really a much more unified way of being yourself. I have an exercise that I do with people called anger evolution. And basically, when people are really angry about something, we kind of get them to talk about what is instinctually their drive. And when they're really angry, a lot of the time there's some wisdom buried in the anger, but if they went and did the angry thing, it could get them into a lot of trouble. So we evolve it, and we use the intellect to talk about how expressing the anger could actually serve them to expand their life, and how intuitively what that could actually do for them, what benefit that could give them. And then so we grab that benefit, and then we intellectually design a way of getting that benefit without necessarily undertaking the unwise action. And sometimes, let's say, instinctually you just want to destroy somebody's property because you're so angry and you've got into a bad situation somehow. If what you're really wanting to do is, by doing that, is destroy the reputation, but you don't even want to do that because even that's not a nice thing, then you could maybe write them a letter saying that, if I don't get this outcome that I really deserve and is quite fair, I'll be forced to inform these other people about your actions. And so you don't inform the other people, but then you want to threaten them with destroying the reputation, and then maybe you'll get the outcome that you're actually after. So you've used your brain, you've expanded your power, and you've done what's right for you on an instinctual level, and you haven't gone to jail or anything like that. And that's what anger evolution is about. It's about like combining those three levels. But anyway, I realize I've been talking a bit too much. We're running a little bit tight on time. So I just want to talk a little bit about purpose. When you're on purpose, you tend to align those three bottom levels. Your intellect, it makes sense what you're doing. It's inspiring to you. It intuitively feels right, and it really brings you into your body. There's a quote that I've got here from Rumi. He says this: "There is one thing that must never be forgotten. If you were to forget everything else but remember this, there is no cause to worry. While if you remember and attend to everything else but forget this one thing, you have in fact achieved nothing. It is as if a king had sent you to a country to carry out one special task. You go to the country and do many things, but if you don't carry out this task which you were sent for, it is as if you have achieved nothing at all. So man has come into the world for a particular task, and that task is his purpose. If he doesn't perform it, he will have done nothing. So you don't run around doing all these other things which aren't really important to you to try and get the right to then do the thing that's important to you. Being yourself is very much about doing what is important to you. There's the be, do, have cycle. So the being actually is brought to more fruition by doing the thing that is right for you, having feedback, having results, and then that enhances your being. Okay, so in order to be yourself, it's important to commit to yourself. Now, I've brought up a photo of my two daughters there because they're committed to themselves. They do what they love to do, and they have fun. Now, that photo there shows them, like I was in the living room at one point, and I looked up to see this before me, and rather than freak out, I decided to calm myself down and take the photo so that I remember the moment, because I told myself I will laugh about this later. And as you can see from the photo, they're standing in the living room covered in mud. And I don't have another photo of how they actually got in there and the route that they took, because you can clearly see the mud all over the carpet and the footprints and so on. So it's important, like, you commit to yourself. If you want to be yourself, you go, you know what, I'm going to commit to being myself, and I don't necessarily know what that is, and start doing what you love to do and have fun. Because, I mean, having fun is the real key, and I talked about this in the first webinar on demystifying purpose. I talked about how fun is actually the key to getting in touch with your purpose, and it's also the key to being yourself. There's meditation that I teach people, which doesn't seem like meditation, because what it is you take a certain amount of time each day. You can start with 30 seconds if you like, or less, or I generally recommend about 10 minutes. But you can start with a little in case it's really challenging for you. And the meditation is this: you do something that you love doing that you don't necessarily have a logical reason for enjoying. And I'm saying, you know, don't necessarily do something completely idiotic. Do something that's safe. There was one lady that did this who came back with, this was in a week-by-week course. She came back and reported, you know what, I tried this, I tried that, nothing was really working. And then I found myself vacuuming the floor one day and I really enjoyed it. And then so she vacuumed the floor each day and just loved it. And it looked like she'd lost 10 years off her face. Like, she looked so much younger because she was vacuuming the floor. And I asked her, you know, have you let yourself enjoy vacuuming before? And she said, you know, I always hated vacuuming. And I'm like, I asked her why, and she goes, well, I guess I thought I was supposed to hate it. Yeah, so you don't let the idea of whether you're supposed to enjoy it or not interfere. And this is why I call it the illogical meditation, because you don't let logic come in. It's about activating the heart. And ideally it'll be an active meditation, so you're actually doing something, because that also engages the body. This opens up your intuition, it activates your instincts, and then you let your head sort it out later. Because unfortunately in our society there's a great tendency for our head to come in and start bossing us around and telling us what we should and shouldn't do. So it's really important in doing this that you are present in your body. And if you do that illogical meditation, just give yourself permission to do it. If you can't give yourself permission to do it, or you can't come up with something to do, you just try stuff. Fail at it. Because, I mean, let's face it, 10 minutes a day, just seeing what you might like cannot be wasted. It's a huge investment in yourself. And they say, you know, If you think education is expensive, try ignorance. I don't know if you've heard that saying. So educating yourself can be incredibly valuable because it opens up so many possibilities for you. And I want to say that if you think that you don't have time to find out what you love doing, try being miserable for the rest of your life instead. See how costly that is. And I'm kind of poking fun at you a little bit here. I don't know who you are listening to this webinar right now, but I know that I myself like to have that kind of thrown back at me every now and then. So I'm almost saying that for myself because I'm going to listen to this webinar later, and it's going to remind me to do this thing more and more. So theological meditation is just simply an experiment in what you might love for no good reason. Because often the thing that you love for no good reason is the thing that you love the most, and then a whole lot of good reasons suddenly rise up in your mind after you realize what it is that you love doing. So theological meditation is about having fun. And it also helps you be present in your body. Now, if you get this thing and you make it becomes clear to you that you love doing this particular thing, it's a good idea to notice how you feel in your body, because the way your body speaks to you is not with language. It doesn't go, oh, hello there, I'd like to put a case to you in an argument. So, it's not like a lawyer. It just has a sensation. You might have a tingling in your toes. You might have, a feeling of air flowing through the middle of your knee. It could be bloody anything. And I mean, I work with a lot of people getting clear on what these bodily sensations are. I know for me, I get a very strange sensation of the back of my skull lifting up, like the bonnet of a car when you lift it up. It's a bit, that's bloody weird. But I know that when that sensation comes, I'm doing something intellectual that I really love doing. And other times when I'm working with a client who's really getting what's important to them, is really kind of embracing their true life, I get this feeling of almost like liquid lava coming out of my throat. Yeah. Now I'm telling you these weird examples because I know that you probably won't have those as sensations yourself. You'll have a strange sensation, and it'll be strange because you can't really anticipate it. And so if you do the theological meditation and you find yourself losing track of time and just enjoying something for no particular reason, then there'll be a sensation that you actually have. I have a client who contacts me every now and then when things kind of go off track. And every time I see a message from her, I immediately reply and say, are you dancing each morning? Because dancing just for 1 or 2 minutes for her makes a massive difference in every aspect of her life. It's incredibly important. So just wanted to be clear that having fun and being present in your body will give you signs and symptoms that will point you towards your real life. Now, that lady that did the vacuuming, she ended up having a situation where she actually came to me originally to help manage the leaving of her husband so that she would end up, separated and so on. But through the vacuuming, she actually realized a whole lot of other aspects in her life that she loved and started embracing them. And then her husband said, oh my God, I can't believe how attractive you've become. And their relationship became more solid than ever. Yeah, so this simple meditation can have some quite unexpected results. And that same lady ended up changing her, like the culture of the family that her nuclear family, like her mother and father and brothers and sisters. They never used to tell each other that they loved one another. And because she did the vacuuming, it's illogical, it doesn't make sense, but it opened her heart. She was actually able to change the culture in that family of, instead of just suppressing expressions of love, they became quite expressive, which was really important to her, and they became much closer as a family as a result. So I'll just talk a little bit about Genuine University. Genuine University, like, we're people that have done this sort of work. We've worked to get in touch with ourselves, and we've taken action on our truth. We've done what needs to be done to express ourselves. We've kind of employed the law of lesser rejection and done something. And we care about other people. we seek to offer real value to the world. So from our inner core, we want to do something meaningful, and we rise to worthy challenges and achieve meaningful goals. Basically, we're part of a network, and it's not activated just yet, like for other people to come into, for the general public to come into. But ultimately, what we're doing is we're creating a network which helps you learn how to be yourself by getting reflections from other people. And also there are other aspects to it, like how to make money doing what you love, how to transform your life into what you want it to be, basically by being held accountable to take small but measurable actions on what is actually true for you. So initially these webinars, these free public webinars, people seem to think that this is what Genuine University is, but really all that's happening here is I'm just creating the content for Genuine University and using it to help people understand what it's about, the core of what we're about. So we're educating people on purpose realization, on making money doing what you love, and also various aspects of self-mastery. We've got 38 webinars being held between May 2014 and February 2015, and they're free and they'll be made available to everyone. So if you think that you know somebody who could benefit from this sort of information, I would love you to give it to them. And even if I never hear from them or they never do anything with us, this is part of my mission and the mission of Genuine University, just to make this sort of stuff available for those for whom it is right for. And we're not about making it, trying to tell people this is what you should be doing. We're just trying to be of service and create the network. The main program that we offer as a starting point is called Real Results. You probably see the name has appeared just at the top there. And that network connects you with a group of like-minded people who are committed to supporting you and challenging you. And basically, they support you to follow your truth and also to create sustainable prosperity, whatever form that might take. That'll be available to members only, and you can become a member down the track when we open up the membership. It also teaches you how to support others in their journey and how to receive support from them in turn. It teaches you how to help others tune into challenges that engage their mind. So it works on that intellect level that we're talking about. It opens their heart. It works on that the intuition level. And it also works on the instinct level by scaring you a little, but in a way that also excites you. Because when your instinct and intuition are joined together in a way that makes sense, it is scary and exciting at the same time. And it's a bit like when you get to go on a roller coaster at an amusement park and so on. It's just, it's great stuff. And Genuine University, the Real Results program in particular, teaches you to undertake challenges like that yourself, that open your mind, that engage your mind, open your heart, scare you a little, and also excite you. Ultimately, what the network is about is giving you incredible leverage to bring your dreams into reality. We've got a quote here. I'll just finish off with a quote from Archimedes, which is not showing up on the screen for some reason, so I'll just read it to you. Archimedes said, "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world." And so the lever that we're giving you is a much greater connection with yourself, and the fulcrum on which to place it is the network. It kind of enables you to pivot and make dramatic, effective, positive, and long-lasting changes in your life that are really going to benefit you for quite some time to come. So if you're part of this webinar, then you'll be part of the mailing list. And if you don't want to be on the mailing list at any point, you just need to let me know. I have no interest in people being on it who don't want to be on it. You'll be part of the mailing list, and you'll get further information about other webinars and information about the recordings that you can download. They'll generally be on YouTube, be downloadable as a video file and as an audio file. So I thank you very much for being part of the Genuine University webinar on being yourself. I hope that it has been enlightening to some extent. I have a feeling, though, that it may have raised more questions than I answered. And that is the nature of this journey, and the idea that you can come to the end of it is made ridiculous by perhaps the experience of having more questions than you started off with, because the more you answer, the more questions you're going to get. And that's ultimately because the depth of your being is never ending. So when it comes to being yourself, I want to invite you on a journey, that kind of journey that I talked about earlier, where I said that if you fall in love with the journey, then you'll be in love forever. I'm Peter Haggerty. Thank you for joining us.